Hey everyone, this is Steve Goad, and welcome to the ImagineFX workshop featuring ArtRage. I wanted to go over a couple of things before I actually start to paint here, like what kind of brushes I'm using. Over here in the toolbox, this is pretty much the majority of the brushes that I use. It just seems to work really well with my workflow. A lot of them are just built-in ArtRage brushes. I did purchase a brush pack from Scatola, and I do have his website here. He also goes by Boxy. It's boxy.co.uk. So you go to his main page and scroll down to the middle. There's an ArtRage 5 pack. There's 70 presets. It's a solid pack. I would highly recommend getting it. Lots of textures, and the things that personally my favorite are the ones that have kind of a canvas blend texture to it. So definitely check that out. I am using the PC version of ArtRage. It's ArtRage 6, and in case you're wondering why it looks different, I'm using the dark theme basically. It's under View Interface Mode, and it's Lights Out. Sorry, my mouse went a little haywire there. It's called Lights Out. And I did a couple of sketches of this so far. This is the one, every artist works differently. I usually kind of sketch my way through I have an idea in my head, but I don't really know what it's going to look like until I start to sketch it. And I really do like to build on canvas. That's how I always paint with oils or any medium. Usually with oils, I'll just start slapping down the color and paint and sketch with the paintbrush as I go. A lot of people like to have a really pretty refined sketch before they begin. Me personally, I know it's going to change as I'm painting, so I usually start with a rough sketch like this. Over here, here's another sample. I was playing around with the colors on what I would like to use, and this right here is what I would like to achieve. It's going to be a Vietnamese setting. It's kind of a nod to my family and background, really. It's going to be kind of a Halong Bay setting. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but definitely Google image that. It's a real pretty area. Got that real emerald green water and those beautiful cliffs, but that's kind of what I'm shooting for on this one. So, and you'll see when I start painting, I'm going to speed up the process. So you'll probably see a lot of changes and additions, but that's kind of what I want to do. Uh, ArtRage 6 comes with a new feature on the canvas setting, and this is what me personally, this is what I've been testing it the last couple of days, and this thing is awesome because this is what will put kind of a texture with a surface lighting effect as you paint. And I think the default's like 15, but that's a little too harsh. I usually bump it down to 3%, and it just creates with a custom chalk like brush and pattern. In fact, this brush right here is the one that I'm using. Pull up the settings, and if you go into brush designer, I'm using just a built-in bitmap that was in here, and it's just a bunch of squares. But the squares is what will actually make the almost like a traditional canvas type look to it as you paint. It's really nice. Another thing you'll notice is when I start to paint, you'll see this window right here, this reference image. It's actually another view of your work, and these come in real handy. If you pull up your reference window or reference panel, you'll see in the lower right hand corner there's a new view, and you can have multiple views. I usually just like to have one, just so I can keep an eye on the painting, the whole piece as I'm zoomed in. So when you close in and start detailing, so it's literally another view, and it'll populate, and you can resize it, which is kind of nice. But you have to be careful though, because if you go to paint on this panel, it'll paint on your picture. So just keep that in mind. You'll see me pull a lot of color from these panels here, or these reference images. The one thing that I notice, or that I've ran into, is on the color sampler tool. If you look at the settings, I noticed that if this setting right here, expand area, if that's too high, it will actually it will actually not pull the color that you need. So if you have a different gradient of color, and you want to pick a specific shade of that color, sometimes if that area is too large, you can it doesn't always pick what you want. So I found that if you lower the expand area to about 4% or so, it will actually be more accurate. So just keep that in mind. I think that's pretty much it. I know that's not a whole lot, but I just wanted to kind of go over a couple of things before I get started. I do want to thank you for tuning in. It's a real honor to do this workshop for ImagineFX. I remember seeing ImagineFX for the first time in a store called Hastings, and they're not even open now, but I remember flipping through it and just being in awe with the amount of talent that was in that magazine. So it's a real, I can't even describe it, because to go from as a kid, young artist, looking at that other talent and wishing that I was that good, from going to that to actually doing a workshop in the magazine for a product that I use quite a bit. That's really cool. Like, no words can describe my feelings on that. I also like to thank Ambient Design. They let me sample this ArtRage 6 before release date, which is so cool. So I'm truly grateful. Uh, I think that's it. So enough of that. How about we get started on this thing, huh? Here we go. Hello and welcome to the ImagineFX workshop. My name is Steve Goad, and the painting you see here was done in ArtRage 6. When I was asked to do a workshop for ImagineFX featuring ArtRage, I was pretty excited, because it's actually a program that I use quite a bit, and I always thought it was a program that tends to be overlooked. Maybe at first glance somebody sees it and thinks it's a simplistic program due to the interface, but it's far from it. My point for the workshop was to do a a complete painting within the program itself. No textures, no importing or exporting to another program. I wanted to do the entire piece in ArtRage, just to show the viewers that, hey, this is something that you can use professionally. Some of my best works were done in ArtRage, and a lot of successful paintings of mine were done in ArtRage. So it's nothing to snuff at. But this is going to be a sped up version of the entire painting process. So my process is kind of a less is more thing. As long as I have a good grasp of what I'd like to paint, the colors I'd like to use, the overall tool set that I use is pretty minimal. The way I like to look at it is, artists create an amazing piece of work just by one pencil, or just a couple of paint brushes. And to me, it should be no different when you're working in digital mediums, because if you find the right brush, right? Me, I like that mixture of hard edge, blend, and texture. So if you can find a brush or two, or a handful of brushes that mimic that, then for me it works perfectly. It's all I need. Everything in here was hand painted. The clouds, the background, the dragon, just everything. And that in itself expresses the power of ArtRage. You know, if you have the creativity or the desire to create, it's the perfect tool to use. All right, here we go. You know, at a time like this, all I can think to say is, man, I wish I could paint that fast. In case you're wondering, I am on a wide or an ultra wide screen monitor. That's why the interface looks so wide there. And I actually, if you can get a, if you have the means of getting an ultra wide monitor, I would highly recommend it because with that extra real estate, you don't have to fight to try and keep everything clean. Like I can keep all my references on the left and then the tools on the right and still have a large area to paint. So the way I usually work is I usually have a sketch on one layer and it's just a simple sketch. I don't usually spend a whole lot of time on it. Like I said in the write up, I tend to build on the canvas. It's just how I like to work. So I'll keep the sketch on one layer and then I'll paint on the bottom layer. That's what I'm doing now. I went ahead and removed the sketch just so I could focus on the background. At this point, I'm just using one brush and pulling color from the reference images. This right here is the mirror tool. If you've never used it, it's great. If you just want to lay down some detail and paint and symmetry, yeah, I put it in the middle of the canvas and just to start bringing in the waves in the foreground. That's why you see the color palette on the right hand side. That's why in this version it looks like it's just going nuts. But I like to, even once I have a good base of color, I'll just keep pulling color from within the painting. I like using this brush here because it has multiple uses. If you want to do a, you know, fine stroke, a clean edge, or you can increase it in size and just kind of tap it and it'll apply the texture that's defined in the brush itself. So you can work on a certain detail, enlarge it, tap it, pull out some textures. It's just a neat way to, and from my experience, from a traditional experience, you know, we didn't pull out a we didn't pull out a brush that was in the shape of leaves and then just tapped it on the canvas. You actually had to paint those leaves. So that's what this type of brush, that's what reminds me of the old school brushes. So just a side note here. If you ever want to make the perfect clouds in ArtRage, start with the pastel brush and kind of play with the settings to get the desired effect that you're going for. But it has a very nice creamy blend to it. So what I like doing is taking the pastel brush, throwing down certain shapes, and then taking a brush that you're seeing now that has a bristle. And what I'll do is I'll outline certain shapes in the clouds, and that bristle texture will actually pull. Uh, it'll start to blend, And then a lot of times to smooth certain areas I'll take the airbrush with a splatter effect and then uh, kind of smooth out those rough edges. So if you're wondering why this particular theme, I'm actually part Vietnamese, and I have a lot of my family that are obviously full-blooded Vietnamese. And one thing I notice is you don't see a whole lot of Vietnamese type artwork, I guess, in the mainstream or on magazines. You can even Google Vietnamese dragon artwork, and not very many pieces will actually show up on Google. In fact, I think one of the pieces I did years back, it comes up. So, it's just something I wanted to do, kind of a respectful nod to my family and heritage, really, because I have a lot of Asian family. And if you've never been to Vietnam, I would definitely put it on your list. There's Ha Long Bay is really beautiful. In fact, this piece right here is kind of centered around the Ha Long Bay area, right there on the with that emerald green. You can kind of see part of it there and on my reference image, but it has that real pretty emerald green water and those cliffs. I don't know if you can tell by the video because I know the compression, and whenever I produce this video, there's some quality loss there, but you might be able to see it. If you notice, if you look around certain areas around the female, you'll see actual lines, like texture, almost like what you'd see if you were painting on a real canvas. That's actually a new feature in ArtRage 6, which is I find really awesome, because if you go into the brush designer, if it's the tab on the far right, you can actually go in there and define a specific pattern to give you that textured look. Because the new feature in the brush designer for the custom brush is the lighting effects that interact with the canvas that you choose, which is really cool. So this is the part I was telling you about where I like to build on canvas. I have a lot of respect for artists that, especially character artists, they can just sit down and develop a really cool costume and or character with all the really neat details. And me, I kind of have to work through that. It's similar to the way I sketch. That's why I didn't record while I was sketching, because I I would sketch something, erase it, sketch it, erase it. So to get the shape of that dragon and the way I wanted it to appear on canvas and fit within that composition, there was a lot of erasing and redoing. So I didn't think that was necessary or worth showing. So you're going to see the outfit on the female here change, because I wasn't really quite sure on the specifics of the detail in her clothing. I just wanted it to resemble the clothing that a Vietnamese woman would wear. This is a good area to add a note. You'll start to see me add a little more depth to the coloring. And the way I do that is instead of picking a different color and then trying to blend it into an existing color, what I find is if you create a new layer and then add the blend mode for that layer to soft light, it acts as like a perfect glaze. So you can see there's a lot more color depth being applied here. You'll just have to play with the settings of the layer opacity to get the effect that you're looking for. Here's another good notation on stencils. If you right click them and choose the mode for guide, example right here where I'm drawing that ball in the dragon's mouth. If you change it to guide, and it'll let you trace on the outside of it instead of the inside of the circle. And another thing is when you use the watercolor brush, like right here with that gold effect that's coming off that ball, if you use the watercolor brush and then use the palette knife, but if you go into the settings of the palette knife and change it to soft, it creates kind of a smear effect. So it's just a neat way to apply paint and then kind of smear it into an effect that you want. Sometimes you can achieve a really cool glow and smoke effect with it. So we're nearing the end of the painting here, and at this stage what I usually like to do is create new layers, lower that opacity, and then pick a brush that has a decent texture. Salve, bristle worn, I actually use that quite a bit. Um, so what I'll do is with a low opacity, I'll start to pull colors from the background into, around the edges of the subject matter in the foreground. Not too much, just hints of it. This technique actually ended up giving this dragon a bit of a magical presence about it, so it worked out really well. I really do want to thank you for taking the time and watching this video. The purpose of it was to just touch on some key points and let the program speak for itself. There's a reason why a lot of people say that this is the best program to transition from traditional, because it's true. You look at the tools, the oil brush, the watercolor brush, ink pen. It's tools that you can relate to. There's a lot of programs out there that when you pick it up and you think it's going to do one thing, but it's not what you expected at all. And there's some programs that have a pretty large learning curve. So if you're looking to get into digital work for the first time, this is definitely the program to go with. So I'll close with this. Art is an extension of you. Everyone's different and everyone has their own flow. So the important thing is to find your own flow and creativity and cultivate it. The best advice I could give is follow the piece, because if you're working on something, it's good to challenge yourself. But if you're working on something that is someone else's flow, you're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel it going against the grain. So it's good to follow that piece. You'll be a lot happier. And artists, their best stems from their passion, and so it's good to focus on that.